Hi, my name is Jordan Marshall and I'm Chief Reporter at Building Magazine. I'll also be chairing today's webinar. Welcome. It's one we're really excited for and it's been really well received, so we're excited to kick things off. Today we're going to be discussing what a national retrofit strategy would mean for UK construction and why we really need one in place. We have a great panel for you today as well. So we have three speakers. We've got Brian Berry, who's the Chief Executive of the Federation of Master Builders, Russell Smith, Managing Director of Parity Projects, and Natalie Bennett, who's a Green Party peer. Please do send through questions and answers. We'll try and get through as many of your questions as possible. We're going to kick things off with a presentation from each of our speakers first. So send through those questions at any time. We'll try and cover up as many as possible, and I know there'll be plenty because it's a topic that we've had plenty of feedback on already. Without too much further ado from me, let's kick over to Brian to start things off for us.
Jordan, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about the need for a national retrofit strategy. If we just go to the next slide. I just want to put this into context really, because actually a national retrofit strategy is part of the green industrial revolution. This was part of the 10-point plan that the Prime Minister announced in November last year. And this was about building back better. It's about supporting green jobs and accelerating the pathway to net zero. And the government revised its carbon emissions targets to cut carbon by 78% by 2035. And of course, the critical thing, of course, is that the UK has a legal obligation to deliver net zero by 2050. And we're not going to do that unless actually we look at our homes in this country, because they contribute 35% of the energy used in the UK and emit 20% of the carbon emissions. So that's why we need a retrofit strategy, because we're not going to deliver net zero by 2050 unless we tackle our homes. Next slide, please. Just in terms of how the industry is responding, I want to flag up through the work of the Construction Leadership Council, which is the umbrella group for the construction sector. There is a work stream called Construct Zero. It is, I think, a really good way of demonstrating the industry working together, sharing solutions to deliver zero carbon. And they've identified 9 priorities, which are going to be used to frame three strands of activity: performance measurement, signposting and support, and communications and engagement. And if we go to the next slide, we can see actually where the priorities are for Construct Zero. 3 main areas in terms of transport, the second one is on buildings, and the third is in construction activity. But the critical one is a number 4, because the Construction Leadership Council has come out in support of a national retrofit strategy. So this is a great achievement, I think, in terms of the industry pulling together and supporting the need for a retrofit strategy for this country. So if we just go on to the next slide. So as I mentioned, our homes are going to be the key in terms of delivering zero carbon. And we're lucky in this country because we have a rich and varied housing stock, but we've got about 28 million. And unfortunately, because of the age of the housing stock, it is one of the least energy efficient in Europe. 39% of our homes were built before 1939. And this has impact on society because we've got 2.5 million households living in fuel poverty. In 2019, 10,000 deaths were linked to cold homes. And at the same time, there's been a decline in the installation of domestic energy efficiency measures. And this becomes even more important when you think that 85% of our homes will still be in use in the year 2050. So it's absolutely critical that we tackle our housing stock. So what's holding us back? Next slide, please. Well, I would argue there's been a lot of short-term thinking by the government and a lack of leadership over many years. For consumers, they are facing competing demands. There's a lack of accurate information that consumers can access. we know that consumers are very concerned about having builders in their home and the fear of having cowboy builders. There's been very few financial incentives, and unfortunately when they do come into play, like the Green Homes grant, they haven't proved to be very successful. Although there's been clear consumer demand, the process for that obviously was overcomplicated and a lack of supply, which again damages, I think, what has been done to date in terms of giving consumers an incentive to upgrade their homes. And of course, in terms of the industry itself, we are facing our own challenges because it is in many ways quite fragmented. There is a skills gap in our industry. We need to upskill many of the trades to understand about retrofitting. There is no formal qualification, and interestingly, 89% of contractors don't hold any formal qualifications for pre-1919 work, which is obviously the difficult area within our housing stock. So if we go on to the next slide. So we need market intervention. The market needs intervention from the government actually to create a retrofit market. And as I mentioned, the Green Homes Grant Scheme that was launched and taken away hasn't been successful and has been, I would argue, damaging in terms of promoting green homes. Any scheme needs to have long-term thinking. There needs to be a long-term plan about putting builders at the heart of upgrading our housing stock. And we know from our survey that we did recently that our members are saying there's a lack of a clear pipeline of work. 26% of F&B members reported that figure. A lack of available finance for consumers at 19%. The lack of consumer awareness, and a lack of capacity and skills in the workforce at 16%. So we just move on to the next slide. So we obviously need to work with consumers. Retrofit is a complex area. Consumers need better access to simple and impartial information. Only 10% of homeowners are undertaking energy efficiency improvements, so we need to get that figure higher up. As I mentioned, they're concerned about poor quality building work, and critically, of course, retrofit needs to be affordable and accessible to all, which is why we need a range of incentives to actually kickstart the retrofit market. So we move to the next slide. So that's why we need a national retrofit strategy, and the F&B has been working within the Construction Leadership Council to develop this long-term proposal. We're calling for a 20-year plan to upgrade our housing stock, which will be in 4 distinct phases. And we're obviously very aware that governments need to be able to show results, which is why we've put it into four stages. And I know Russell, my colleague here, will be talking a bit more about the detail of the retrofit strategy. But if we go on to the next slide, what I really wanted to flag up is the benefits of a retrofit strategy, because conscious that politicians need to be able to show results for their term in office, we've identified that within the 4-year period, if the government were to invest a modest £5.3 billion, it would generate 100,000 jobs in the retrofit market. And also, given that the NHS has been under enormous strain, that amount of money would also save the NHS up to 1.4 billion. And for consumers, we're going to see a reduction in their energy bills, which I think will become really important for many people, given that the economic situation is uncertain for many in the country. And of course, the environmental benefits will be to reduce carbon emissions. So we just move on to the next slide. Our retrofit strategy that we've put together through the CLC has the support of over 50 organisations, so fantastic support there. We're also getting obviously a very good media coverage. The Express newspapers picking up the Green Homes as a campaign, which is obviously very good. And we're obviously building up to the COP26 United Nations Climate Change Conference in November. So if anyone listening today would like to be a supporter of the retrofit strategy, please let me know. And our next slide. So just in terms of next steps for the retrofit strategy, we have received a letter from the Secretary of State, Kwasi Kwarteng, saying the government welcomes the recommendation made in the National Retrofit Strategy, but we've yet to see the result. And we're all eagerly awaiting the publication of the heat and building strategy, which we were expecting sometime last year. It seems likely that it's going to appear next month, and there's been quite a lot of press speculation about what it will contain. I think my concern is with the heat and building strategy, will the focus be too much on the heat and less on the fabric of the building? Doesn't make much sense to me if we're focusing on heating systems and not looking at the fabric, because nothing will work unless we actually make sure the home is properly retrofitted. The spending review later in the year will also be critical, of course, in terms of government spending, and we need to get industry and consumer awareness about the need to upgrade our homes. So we're looking at developing a marketing campaign in the months ahead. And as I mentioned earlier, the COP26 in November would, I think, be a fantastic opportunity for this government to use the retrofit strategy as a flagship policy, something that can show the world that actually we are taking the lead in upgrading our housing stock. So finally, just our last slide. I started off my presentation about the green industrial revolution. I've touched on the need for a national retrofit strategy, but what we need, of course, as part of that is the green homes revolution. So when we're talking about revolutions, I'd like to hear more about having a real radical revolution to create green homes in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Brian. That was a great way to kick off the presentation. Next, we're going to hear from Russell. So I'll just give you presenter control, Russell, so that you can share your slides. And then we'll hear from Natalie after Russell.
Thank you. Can you let me know when you can see my slides?
Yeah, I can see them now. Perfect. Just if you put them into presenter mode, that would be great.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. As Brian pointed out, I helped Brian and the Construction Leadership Council put together some analysis and the reports that you can download now from the Construction Leadership Council's website. I'd invite everyone to do it. It's not very long. The key thing about this is it was a strategy we wanted people to get behind on the basis that we don't really have anything that sorts out the big issues that then we can go into detail on. So I'll delve into that. It's come from the background for me as a practitioner. I do domestic housing retrofit on a daily basis, and I have done for 16 years after retrofitting my own home and realizing this is an enormous problem that isn't getting tackled. And the key thing about this particular strategy is that we want to be able to look at it from the perspective of every person that is affected by or can affect the decarbonisation of the existing housing stock. Effectively, we've got 27 million homes in the UK, and we've got not a very long time to deal with it. And our particular strategy has set ourselves a target of 2040 to be able to deal with this, particularly because of the more urgent need for having an impact than actually the 2050 target we've set as a country, in our view, because of the climate change issue. I think that one of the central tenets of this is, as an industry, we wanted to come together and show that we can do things collectively. We really can, including bring money, but there are certain things that only government can unlock, and we wanted to demonstrate what those were. What some of the key issues within all of this is the need for 400,000 new tradespeople to do this work, and we've done this by modelling every retrofit, every measure for every home that needs to be retrofitted in the country, and work back to how long it will take over that period of years to get the work done, and looked at how many people will need to do work at that pace. And we don't have enough, and I'll show you just how big that issue is later. The unique thing about the retrofit agenda is that it impacts every single part of the UK, not just because that's where all the houses are, but that's where all the people are that can do this work. So it can drive local economies everywhere, provided the mechanism for delivering this is set up in the right way. And the thrust for making this happen, we believe, and this is a bit of a Marmite topic, if I'll be honest with you, with the discussions we've had, having a central agency that's linked, that is akin to the way the Olympic Delivery Authority was set up, not just to be a manager, but to inspire and lead all the people that need to be part of that particular piece of work. So we need to inspire not just householders that want to do it, but contractors, practitioners to get into the industry if we're going to attract all those sorts of people. And they need long-term leadership. Back to Brian's point, we need some long-term visions here that be able to make that happen. So in the year one, we believe that 100,000, just over 100,000, 120,000 people could be attracted into this. 520,000 people need to be created by year 5. And we've done this because we've got a particular profile we think is sensible, rather than throwing everything at this immediately. We believe there can be a 21% saving of carbon in UK homes by 2030 and 90% by 2040. So big issue there. There will still be some carbon left in the housing stock that will need to be offset in some way. So we can plan for that now if we know that is a thing. Interlocking components. This is the notion that all of these things on this page will need to be in place in order for the entire National Retrofit Strategy to be successful. Take any one of those away and it will not happen. So whenever you speak to someone that says, well, okay, Russell, which one of these things do we really need to do? Ignore those questions. It's all of it. Leadership and communications, I think we've already spoken about the need for the central agency there. And we're recognising that there is nervousness about creating new organisations, which then particularly take on a political life of their own. But we think in this situation, it would be a great thing to do. And supporting transition periods. Many of you on the call that have been within the construction industry for a while, you'll appreciate that it's quite a robust and macho industry, and people don't want to do stuff if they don't know how to do it, or worse, they get on and do it even if they don't know how to do it. What we need is an environment, or as a colleague on the working group called it, a safe space where people can try new things, they can learn, and they're not going to be pilloried and taken to court if they don't do it quite right. They're given a comfort blanket. Maybe that's money, maybe that's extra time, maybe that's a coach on site to help them be better. Because at the moment, nobody wants to try anything. Performance standards, making sure we're actually doing things that genuinely perform. And that's not just about energy, carbon, but it's about water performance, and it's about the air quality within the buildings as well. Making sure all of those things in combination are actually delivering when we've done the retrofit. Financing and grants follows. I think there are plenty of finance providers out there desperate to lend into the home improvement space. If we can provide them with a framework that enables, very well trained contractors and our proof of the fact that they've done a good job, they will lend. And training accreditation, I've already mentioned. We're going to go into that again. Materials and equipment. I couldn't. I was dubious about adding this in as a particular tenet, but the reports of the last couple of weeks on supplies being very difficult to get hold of, and/or price hikes of up to 50% on some materials, really shows you why it's massively important for us to bring in the manufacturers and the distributors of building products into this. They can signal when they're having problems, even potentially a decade ahead. If we know we need certain volumes of kit at some point in the future because we've modelled it, we've got a plan, then those guys can really start to take a big part in the plan that we've got going forward. Creating customer demand. Everyone always cites this as the thing that is going to be our biggest problem. I can assure you, working for the last few years with support from the Department of Energy, we've been running some programs to support customers that are able to pay for the retrofit of their own property. We have no shortage of customers. We definitely have shortage of people that want to do the work. I can turn on a tap in Oxfordshire, Sussex and London right now with people that want to do this work, but we can't get enough people that want to actually engage in this particular work. So, and they will, if they think it's a long-term proposition for them to train new people up and take on new apprentices, etc., etc. A compliance and quality regime, I think we can safely say that goes hand in hand with having people that are trained, and we've got performance standards to aim to as well. So, but we need the police to be able to check these things rather than just trusting a contractor has done the work and signed it all off and said it's wonderful. To do this, as Brian outlined, we've suggested a 4-phase approach. Phase 1 is about underpinning capability, and that is a phase that enables us to say, do you know what, we need these 400,000 people. Let's really start that production line and get them going. Building output, increasing the pace, going fast very quickly. All that does is incentivize low quality, and we want to be able to build up, frankly, some of the lost lost goodwill that the Green Homes Grant has created. So we need to be able to build up confidence in everybody. If we've got contractors coming into this space that have got the abilities and they're trained up, not just in technical stuff, but in customer service, then we are going to start seeing this as something that people genuinely want to do. And by the time they do it, we've got an industry that's ready to deliver on it. And a final push, S-curve, we're tailing off, we're hopefully getting the work done, deliberately tailing off, rather than just saying, stop, everyone go and find a new job. We're tailing off, we're planning where they can go next. And similar graph really, if we've got this S-curve of output, then we've got an S-curve of decarbonisation. What does it mean in terms of measures? This is why we want to be working extremely closely with the manufacturers and distributors of products, with large numbers of bits of kit installations that need to happen over these periods of time. And don't forget, some of these bits of kit will not be fit for purpose and might need replacing early. Some of them will there is accounting here for some things that will need to be replaced at the end of their life, having been installed maybe next year or the year after. But this is a huge undertaking, and we shouldn't be afraid to embrace that and get ready for it, rather than looking at each other across all these different decisions and waiting for everybody else to make the first move. And one thing that's quite clear is something that's come out of the industrial strategy, 600,000 heat pumps announced per annum. Absolutely unequivocally agree with that, but we need to make sure that houses are ready for those heat pumps. You cannot put a heat pump, you could heat a tent for the heat pump, okay, but you shouldn't, because the bills will go up even if the carbon goes down. So there are two ends of the extremes when we talk about retrofit strategy. You can assume that the grid will be decarbonised and electrify everyone's heating system, but people that are in fuel poverty will still be in fuel poverty because they can't afford to heat the house. So there is a middle ground to be had here. Every house is unique, and we need an industry that's able to cope with that mass customization, I once heard it called, which is the great answer. And the number of people that will be within that industry to make that work, shown here. So you look at the number of people working in the RMI sector from 1997 through to 2008 here, where we had our crash. As an industry, we still haven't recovered from that, and frankly, Brexit has probably got rid of a few more people that aren't on the statistics databases right now. But we've got a large number of people that will hit that S-curve to make that happen as well. Huge numbers of people. So what does it mean in terms of numbers? Again, adding to some of the figures that Brian's already shown you, we've set the figures out in terms of year one actually, and the parliamentary period here. We're asking government to invest actually less than they promised in their manifesto, but they need to do it in a smart way. By 2030, the figures are really starting to stack up here. But actually, the key thing here is what the financial return is for government. If you are presenting any business with the proposition here of a return on investment in the way that we're presenting it here, they ought to bite your arm off. For UK PLC, this is a fantastic investment. And it's not just in terms, these are figures that have come from many studies carried out on the returns on investment of various retrofit programs and other infrastructure type programs that have occurred in various countries over the years. And other studies that have come on the back of the health benefits that as a result of this much better performing properties, better air quality, getting rid of mold and damp. These things have a big impact on the amount of people having to need support from a GP or hospital. So going to the next slide, what we want to be able to do is make sure we're in a, it will come up. Sorry about this. So multiple benefits to the UK. It's every community benefits. We shouldn't get away from that fact, provided it's procured in the right way. If government insists on doing top-down procurement, so there are big companies subcontracting, all the money sucks out of this particular model before we get a chance to go for it. One thing that we'd advocate is putting small companies in each of the towns and villages that need to do this work in charge of this stuff to make sure actually the money stays in those areas and doesn't get sucked off to a house in the south of France. Increasing government tax revenues, net government surpluses over this particular period are all spelled out right there. This is a very investable proposition that impacts every house and lots of people creating jobs to be able to do that stuff within it. I've got a slide that's going to pop up eventually, which shows again all the numbers of people that are given the support. I would say with Brian and colleagues, we've presented this to all of these people. They aren't just blindly supporting it. This is something they all really genuinely are getting behind. And if you've got comments, do go to the link and do send through further comments and suggestions for improving the document. The confidence that Brian and I have had in presenting this to various government departments over the last 6 months has given us the confidence that hopefully the heat building strategy is quite closely aligned with what we've got in here. But of course, the devil is in the detail, and we look forward to seeing what actually comes, what's actually in it as it gets published. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Russell. That was a really insightful presentation. So much detail there that I'm sure all will be really helpful for everyone who's watching today. So I'm just going to hand over to Natalie to round out our presentations this morning. And I'll just stop the screen sharing. Sorry. There we go. And Natalie, I'll let you kick things off.
Well, thank you very much, Jordan, and it's a great pleasure to follow two such brilliant presentations that essentially, I think Brian and Russell have set out the what, why and how to retrofit Britain's homes to a decent standard. But I dare say possibly I've got the most difficult task, which is to explain politically how this can be done, how we might actually get to a workable long-term policy. And it's perhaps useful to set out starting where I start from. So anyone who's sitting there wondering, my accent comes from Australia originally, and I'm a builder's daughter. And for the younger members of the audience, this will seem like a very strange and foreign time, but I was actually, as a child, this was before mobile phones. And so my first experiences in the building industry were answering the phone for my father when he wasn't at home and speaking to his Greek bricklayers and his Italian tilers. And so I kind of grew up in the midst of the building industry. And when I think about transferring this forward to the UK, when I became Green Party leader in 2012, I think it was the following year that I actually went to the Installation UK annual conference, the kind of big trade fair. And that was really an introduction to the reality of British, particularly retrofitting industry, of extreme boom and bust. Because what I met was a whole lot of people who were basically preparing to go out of the industry, having seen a real injection of funding under the Labour government that finished in 2010, real growth, huge numbers of people have been trained, lots of people have been skilled up. The last of that money was now being spent, and people were looking out to do other things. And that's something I've also seen a few years later when the last of the feed-in tariff was taken off from solar, suddenly, unexpectedly, overnight. I talked to a lovely, very, very innovative and forward-thinking solar installer in Greater Manchester, who was very sadly wasn't going to be able to give his apprentices a job that he'd been expecting to be able to, because he was essentially getting out of solar and switching over to his other business, which was installing fancy light fittings in Manchester nightclubs, which was, obviously he'd made sure he hadn't put all his eggs in one basket, but that's what people have had to do with the nature of the retrofitting industry. And so what I want to do is really offer some constructive thoughts today, because I always want to be positive about how things can be done differently. And to start with that, I'll start off by just reflecting, looking across the channel, looking around other parts of Europe, and acknowledging that other countries have solved their problems with housing quality, with retrofitting their homes. And my sort of evidence for that is kind of the reverse, in that I was once, probably it was again 2012, talking to a group of Scandinavian ambassadors about home energy efficiency, as you are. And there was just this really, really explanatory outbursts, very undiplomatic outbursts that came from one of these ambassadors, who said to me, "I've just never been so cold as I've been in Britain," talking about someone who comes from a place where winters are, of course, sort of 20 degrees colder than they are, at least, than they are here. But she had no expectation that you would ever be cold in a building. And that really gives us the kind of target that we should be aiming for. So it's possible, it can be done. We know other countries have done it. Secondly, what I'd say is that a real positive is that everybody literally now is talking about retrofitting. It's not just the Committee on Climate Change as you'd expect. I mean, I've also done at least one, possibly two events with the all-party parliamentary group Bankers for Net Zero, and they're developing up their own retrofitting strategy. I think they could probably learn an awful lot, particularly from the one we've just seen from the Construction Leadership Council. But nonetheless, they're approaching it from their approach as financiers and seeing what they can do. And what we're talking about here is something that I talk about often in the climate sector, which is co-benefits. And I think perhaps if there was one thing missing from the two earlier presentations is what, perhaps not for this audience, but what needs to be done for broader audiences is to really stress how many benefits there are for society from a proper, serious, long-term project of retrofitting. We've sort of touched on one, which is all the jobs, all the economic opportunities. And I think we really need to stress how what we're talking about here is, I don't tend to use the government's term levelling up. I talk about spreading out, and it's spreading prosperity into every community in the land. So everybody, every community has a huge number of homes and other properties that need to be retrofitted. That means small business opportunities, job opportunities everywhere. And I did once at a meeting like this, someone asked, well, but what are we going to do? What's going to happen to those jobs when all of these places are retrofitted? Now, as Russell indicated, of course, you do have, it's a bit like the painting a bridge, you do have to come around and start to refresh, renew, replace things. But also, as I said, this is at an absolute minimum a 30-year project. And, I think thinking of the scale of having businesses and jobs for 30 years is pretty good in the current environment. But what's also important to talk about is co-benefits of things like, Brian did mention this, the cost to the NHS of cold homes. It's not just NHS costs. You look at, in a normal year, what our excess winter deaths figures are. They're absolutely horrifying, and they come almost entirely from cold homes. So actually, getting people healthier, not just saving NHS costs and saving lives, but also having a healthier population is a really huge issue. And thinking about all of the skills that can be learned, can be transferred to other things. So I think it's really worth stressing those co-benefits, as of course, as has been stressed in the year of COP26 of cutting our carbon emissions. And I think it was Brian who said, and I think I see this from the government, we really need to get the focus on the fabric of buildings. There's a lot of inclination in government, and it doesn't just come from one side of government, to look at the big new shiny things, ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, exciting shiny new things, district heating schemes, and there's a lot of potential in district heating schemes. But all of these things, certainly in the case of heat pumps, demand properly insulated homes, and certainly will work far more efficiently, whatever the system we're talking about. So I think the question is, how do we do this? And, we could hope for this long delayed heat and building strategy. But I think we come back to the question of what we need is a long-term strategy. And, British politics is innately extraordinarily unstable at the moment. I'm not necessarily expecting that the next election will be 2024. I think there's a very good chance that it's long before that. We've had elections and referendums just coming along one after the other. And so it's really crucial what we have to try and do, however difficult it is in the political system, to get a generally politically agreed approach to this, something that's going to hold through different governments. And this kind of thing is possible. Maybe there's not many examples of it in political systems like ours, but I'm very much influenced by very little book by a professor at Cambridge called Stein Ringen, Nation of Devils. And he talks about how Norway made its pension policy. And there was a general agreement it needed a new pension policy. And they had over 10 years, through 3 different governments of different political hues, they had white papers, green papers, blue papers, whatever Norway has. And they consulted workers, they consulted employers, they consulted the insurance sector, they consulted the actuarial experts, they consulted academics. And what they essentially got to was an end of agreeing what the new pension system would look like. Virtually all the political parties signed up to it. All sectors of society have signed up to it. So society agreed a new system. And that's really what we've got to try and aim for, try and head towards in the UK on retrofitting homes policy, as indeed we should in other crucial areas of climate, such as food policy and industrial policy. So we have some real consistency. Now that's pretty difficult to achieve in a first past the post majoritarian electoral system, where you tend to have a seesaw where one party comes in and tries to undo everything else. But I think as an industry, you're in a good position to really be pushing for that, to be encouraging for that, talking about that. And which brings me to something that I say to many different groups I talk to, from school children upwards in age, which is we really are, it's always been true, but it's more true now, that everybody needs to make politics what they do not have done to you. You know, particularly if you've got a Tory MP, it's not too late to really get onto them, really push them to say, hey, what we really need from the heat and building strategy is this. But whatever your local MP is, say to them, you know, we need a long-term strategy here. The Green Homes Grant is essentially a demonstration of everything you shouldn't possibly do. It was an absolute unmitigated disaster. The best thing we can do out of that is try and turn it around and say, let's do something better. Let's do the opposite of this, do something different, do something long-term, stable, secure, that allows people to train, that allows small businesses to develop, that allows us to take forward. And that brings me to an even broader issue, something that I think we need to tie this with, because we're talking now as we have the building safety crisis, the whole situation around what's happened since Grenfell, and awareness of just the incredibly poor quality, the many issues for so much that's been constructed in the last 10 years or 20 years or possibly even longer. That's another group of people that I'd urge you to reach out to make alliances with, to work together with, because they've got real issues, and you know, they're certainly people who are in the most urgent need of retrofitting you could possibly imagine. So, I think we have to be positive. We have to look forward to a really different way of doing politics, as a different way of doing building. We shouldn't be building homes that immediately need to be retrofitted as we are now. We have to stop that, but we also have to start this mass retrofit process. And I'm really encouraged, the number of these events that I'm doing, I can really see that industry bodies are getting more engaged in politics because they have to do it. And we have a real problem in British politics, and it's not just British politics. I'm quite unusual. I'm one of the few people in politics with a scientific background. We also need more people in politics with a construction background, and we need people in construction to get involved in politics, is what everyone's on this call today is doing. So thank you for that. We're here to help and do what we can, but really leadership needs to come from the industry, as is coming today, and I look forward to seeing more of it. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much. That was great. Sorry, I just had a problem with my mic there coming back on. We've had so many questions come back in that I think we should just jump into it straight away and sort of kick things off. I might just pick up on one we've just had coming, because it's sort of off the back of exactly what you were talking about, Natalie. So I think it's a logical first step. But we've had a question come in about how effective can a long-term strategy be when there's such a short-term aspect in so much politics. Like, how can we go about, as a sector, helping to make sure that a policy can be implemented longer term?
I think that's a question of employing political pressure, doing everything you can, and acknowledging. I mean, my sort of slightly longer term answer is, join, make votes matter, and try and ensure that we have a modern functional political system. That's a bit of a large scale issue. On the shorter term, if you have a business based in an area, making sure your local MP really knows about these issues, is really informed about them. Demand a meeting, talk to them, try and educate them, and you will have to educate most of them about the construction sector. So get your MP knowing, look at the House of Lords and see who talks on these issues. The House of Lords is, practically speaking, actually, I've written a piece. I'll try and stick it in the chat in a minute about how to use the House of Lords, because one of the very strange things that's happening at the moment is, because the government has a majority of 80 in the lower house, the Lords is actually where political resistance is centred in Westminster. And there are people in the Lords who will put down amendments and sometimes at least shift the government position a bit. So, use the Lords, look and see who are relevant Lords who are interested in these issues. So be active, educate yourself about how the political process works and get engaged in it. it's not going to be a magical turn things around overnight, but the more that happens, the better off everyone's going to be.
Brian, Russell, do you have any additional thoughts on that, of how people can get involved and help make sure it's a strategy that lasts long term?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely essential that you have a long-term strategy, as Russell and I have said, through the National Retrofit Strategy. And I think actually the fact the industry has come together through the Construction Leadership Council, that's been a very big step forward, because if all parts of the construction sector are pulling together in support of a single strategy, that means any government of any colour will need to listen carefully to the industry. But let's not forget, the real issue is about tackling climate change, reducing carbon emissions. It's the issue of our time. I think the people are expecting industry and government to work on this, and there may be differences in style, but actually in reducing carbon emissions, there has to be a cross-party consensus. This should not be a political issue. This is one that is in a national priority, and that's why we need to push it. And I think that's why a lot of people are becoming much more interested in the retrofit strategy as a means to solving climate change.
Starting to get out of my comfort zone now talking about politics, but I have to say my habit is, over the last 16 years of doing this, having this specialism, is to just set a good example of what good looks like. And certainly I've done actually what Natalie suggested. I've always got my local MP involved in what I have done. I've got fantastic pictures of myself and Tom Brake down in southwest London, gurning in front of insulation. And do you know what? It makes a difference because they get it and they understand it. And I think get as many MPs to sites so they can see what this really means, and talk to householders who've had it done. I think they feel much more empowered to know this is a good thing and will make a good decision on that basis. So yeah, for my lower level, I think that's a really practical next step, and it's quite easily done.
Brilliant. Okay. So we're always going to get a lot of questions about this, given conversation in the past few days through the media, and it was flagged in the presentations earlier, but we have some questions coming in about boilers and heating systems. And so I know both Brian and Russell, you raised different things about building fabric, that there's no point, changing heaters if all the heat's being lost because it's incorrectly insulated, or the building materials and fabric are incorrect in the first place. But one of the first questions I've had come in on this point is about funding for the replacement of heating systems and boilers. Should that be left up to the owner of the property, or do you think it's something that there needs to be sort of some incentivization for homeowners? Otherwise, will the cost burdens be too much to help see these strategies implemented?
Well, I would argue actually with the retrofit market, it's about creating a new market. And Russell talked about the 8 interlocking components, which are so essential for the success of the retrofit strategy. So I think the government does need to put some form of financial incentives in at the beginning. But where we want to get to, of course, is where the capital value reflects of a property reflects its energy rating. When we get to that situation, householders will be much more keen and to upgrade their homes because they will attract a higher premium when they come to sell it. There may be at some point in the future a need for intervention at the point of sale or at the time you're having substantial building work done. But the key thing at the moment is to get the strategy and start developing the market.
Yeah. My particular angle, Jordan, is that on the one hand, I mean, I'm sure there's been a lot of people commenting on the ban the boiler situation and saying, oh, but an air source heat pump's going to cost me £12,000. Yeah, do you know what? An air source heat pump's going to last you a very long time. There's hardly any moving parts, and it needs very little maintenance. So there's that angle. But where's the cash going to come from? I get that. Actually, different commercial propositions need to be made to the marketplace, which is not just buy some stuff, get a warranty, and hope for the best. There are models that include things like buying heat as a service. So, a long-term arrangement where somebody else has paid for your heating system, and you're paying that off over a period of time, but you're embedded within that service as somebody that's going to make sure you're comfortable, the kit's working, and will replace it when it reaches the end of its life. Just like you get a new car under PCP. Why couldn't we do a whole house like that? Well, we can. and financial providers are exploring all that stuff. But what they need to be able to explore it properly is certainty over an industry that's competent enough to do this, and enough people that can actually turn this into a national offer rather than just starting in bits and pieces of the country.
Natalie, I saw you nodding along there. Was there anything you wanted to add in?
Well, just to add, I mean, I agree that all of those things need to happen, but there's still also an enormous amount of social housing stock and housing stock in very poor communities where there's a real argument for putting direct government funding in to make it happen. And that also has the potential to actually really help kickstart the industry. If you have a steady income stream, put in to tackle poverty, a steady income stream into social housing, improving the quality of social housing, then what you've done is you've created a foundation, a level that helps the industry develop and also helps with that consumer confidence thing. If the builder is able to show you a picture of what they did in, they've got some work done already, it's here, it's clear, and it's something that was organised by the local council, supported by the local council, that gives them a print of confidence. And so, I think there's got to be serious injection of government money into this, as well as policy change and arrangements to make sure that people are encouraged to spend their own money as well. And, there's the cautionary tale of, I can't remember what it was called now, under the coalition government, that dreadful scheme where people were told, borrow money at 16%. And get your home, and it was an absolute disaster and had almost no enrolments for obvious reasons. And it mustn't be too tied up in financial complications. It mustn't be yet one more financialisation in way in which bankers hope to make money and it costs everybody else.
Yeah.
Brilliant. One of the next topics that we've sort of been asked a lot of questions about, so I'm going to try and roll a few of them into one, is around skills. And so there was that obvious graphic that Russell, you showed where there is this, jobs increase needed, but in general, construction has a skills shortage, and this is a whole new raft of skills potentially as well. Where are we going to get them all from?
Well, I actually think this is a great opportunity for people who may not have considered a career in construction. You're quite right. We have got a growing skills crisis. 38% of our members say they're struggling to recruit bricklayers at the moment. So, and we've had this for some time. It's been boom bust in terms of skills, people leaving the industry as a result of the recession. So there's a bigger problem there about the image of the industry attracting people into our sector. But retrofitting may be attractive to more women coming into our industry, ethnic minorities who may not have been put off. There are all sorts of new jobs here which challenge the mud and boots image that sometimes people have of the building industry. So I think it's a very positive move, and if we can sell this to people in schools, that actually the construction sector is committed to climate change, is actually doing its bit, and have you thought about improving the places where people live and work, our messaging can be different. We'll get a wider range of people coming into our industry.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Brian. I think one of the other aspects is bear in mind that there are some industries that are evolving, and to the extent that they won't need the people they've got right now. But we've got some really well-aligned skills in other sectors that you can shift over very easily. I mean, what's the most pertinent one? Air source heat pumps. Okay, so frankly, it's a cottage industry right now, and it needs to scale up very rapidly. The people that I know personally that are very good at this are proper geeks, right? They're not just your people that are usually just chucked up at a building. They fine tune, they look at the heating curves, and make sure the temperatures of input and output are correct. These are the sort of people that are used to sort of maybe even maintaining an internal combustion engine. We won't need them anymore. And so, moving those people over into this sector, retraining car mechanics into air source heat pump engineers, I think that's a no-brainer. There'll be other parallels like that as well. One of the things that I've always been disappointed with the construction industry about, and I say that as a civil engineer that's been in it all my career, is it's never promoted as something that's a good place to go. Especially now I've ended up in the RMI sector. It seems to be the place that people have to go to because they can't do anything else. And actually, you can make a really good living as a professional or as a tradesperson, and promoting it as something that is a really attractive place to go. You can be in charge of your own destiny, provided the industry is set up in the right way. You can have an instant impact on someone's health by doing a decent retrofit, and it's a good place to be. So I think I don't think we'll have a problem attracting people into the sector, provided we actually have this long-term view. We're back to everything we've all been talking about.
Yeah, and just a couple of things to add to that. Perhaps just a word of caution, because earlier this morning I was on a call with the food sector and food production sector and farming sector, and they were talking about their massive labour shortage, particularly in the light of Brexit, and the need to attract huge numbers of people into the food sectors and the farming sector. So one of the interesting things we're about to see, I think, is an enormous crunch in terms of labour supply, and we're already seeing stories about this. I think The Economist this week had a story about this. So it's going to have to work very hard. I'm glad Brian picked up the point of gender. One of my favourite examples of this is Britain trains every year as many hairdressers as are employed in the entire hairdressing sector. And, it's a real issue that there's, getting women into building is something I've been watching people trying to do for 40 years, and there really hasn't been much notable success, and there really needs to be change done in that. And we've really got to tackle a very British thing about not working with your hands, and the idea that everyone's ambition should be to work in an office. And I think of a young man I met down in the southwest who had set up a very good business, very successful little business, building dry stone walls. But he was a graduate. I think he was an environmental studies graduate. And his father was horrified that he was out in all weathers getting his hands dirty. And this young man was clearly coming under enormous amounts of pressure from the family to go and do something different, even though he'd actually set up from scratch entrepreneurially a very good small business. And so we've really got to tackle those things. And, if you're thinking about sources of labour, there's a lot of pretty unhappy young or youngish graduates in call centres earning horrible, not very good money and having a horrible life. That's a place to look at, people who have a set of skills and knowledge that if you can find the way to get them into the industry, to install those air source heat pumps, they've got a lot of skills that they can feed into that.
Yeah, no, definitely. We actually had a few specific questions about what can be done to attract more women into construction retrofit specifically, in order to expand the potential workforce. And I think we've touched on that pretty well. Is there anything anybody else wanted to add on that point, or do you reckon if everyone's happy we've covered that off? We've also had some questions around existing standards and how they could be worked into, whether they are part of or can be applied to the retrofit strategy, things like passive house standard and that sort of thing. How does that work in line with the National Retrofit Strategy?
Yeah, I'll take that one. It's completely complementary. So for retrofit, it's all about the appropriateness of whatever target you're aiming for. So nobody's going to do, very few people are going to do a passive house standard retrofit because it's just too expensive. And what we are going to be doing is having a balance between all of the things that we outlined in terms of heat decarbonisation, reducing the need for heat and insulating the building and an entirely new heating system, all those combinations. But the building tells you what it needs, okay? The key thing for us is having standards that people can aspire to. Let's not stop people going for a passive house standard retrofit if they really want to. But if they can afford it, happy days. But there are people, back to Natalie's point, that just need to be warm. So it's starting to say the entire country needs a passive house standard would be absolute insanity. So what we need is the ability to be able to have everybody aim towards something. But speculating on that right now, we're just trying to say we need an infrastructure within which the industry can operate, and we're saying that there's interlocking components. Performance standards are in that. As an industry, we need to come together to understand what those things are. So I don't want to say anything more controversial than I've already said. But ultimately, this is about doing the sort of things that Natalie is sort of giving us some great ideas on, and just making sure that we all agree on something, and let's just do it because we haven't got any more time to muck around.
I think absolutely right, Russell. I think though, for those of us who are not so familiar, it's quite a complex field, and there's a need for simplifying it so that we know and understand, so we can actually carry out the retrofit strategy. The whole issue about skills and standards are interlinked, and yet it's still quite confusing. So I think more work needs to be done on this, which if we're going to encourage more people into our industry, we need to make sure they understand what is required of them.
Completely. So we've had some more questions about a point that you raised to start off with, Brian, around fabric correction in terms of building fabric, and sort of how the thing that is catching everyone's attention is things like the, ban the boiler, or like very technical upgrades. How do we sort of like get it more mainstream that it's actually, the basics you sort of need to get right first?
Well, that's what I think leadership is needed from the government, and the heating building strategy should and hopefully will include fabric first as well, because it's absolutely nonsense to be upgrading the heating system if it's all the if the house is still leaky. It doesn't make any sense at all. So I'm hoping the delay is because the government is weaving in the National Retrofit Strategy into its pre-existing heat and building strategy, and we'll get the composite document that we require. And if we don't, there'll be a lot of shouting.
I'd add a layer onto that, if I may. I know of quite a few heat pump installers right now that are not looking carefully at the insulation in buildings at all. I think the issue really is about, given we've got such a fragmented industry, we need models that are able to bring all that stuff together. We've got a lovely standard now called PAS 2035, which is bringing in a person called a Retrofit Coordinator, which is looking at the retrofit from the householder's perspective, putting a plan in place and coordinating the people that ought to be doing things in the right order, which is the opposite of the Green Homes Grant, which was, here you go, here's a bunch, a very small bunch of people that appear to be qualified. You go and tell householders what you want to sell them. That's the exact opposite of what we need as an industry. So having the ability to have a holistic view on each individual property is absolutely critical. Otherwise, we're going to be undoing things we shouldn't have done, and we haven't got time.
And I add to that, what you're really going to have to take on is the government's absolute attachment, which is much broader than the building sector, to digital first. And I mean, I really tackled the Lord Cullinan on this quite a few times, because we were told with the Green Homes Grant, oh, it's all right, there's a website, you just plug things into the website and it tells you what to do. And what I've seen some really good work being done is focusing on the need. What you need is a one-stop shop in every community where you can actually go and talk to a person post-COVID, or at least, you could do it digitally in the sense of the kind of way we're doing this now. Someone comes to your house, and then, if you still need COVID precautions, you can then have a chat like this. But you actually need one person who you can talk to, form some kind of relationship with, trust, a person who clearly knows what they're talking about, who can talk about your house and say, well, that weird little extension you've got on the back, well, you're going to have to do some special thing to solve the cold bridge problem, or whatever it is. Something really directed towards your house and understanding your house. I mean, my terrace in Sheffield, I had a build around and wanted to insulate the cellar, the floor of the ground floor. And, I kind of knew, just because I have a little bit of technical knowledge, that the plan A was really, really a very bad plan that would have resulted in lots of damp problems. But that's just because I have a little bit of knowledge. That you can't assume that every household is going to be in that situation, and builders have to know, or have to have someone they can go to so they know.
Absolutely.
But we're running out of time, so I'm just going to ask one last question of everybody, I think, and then this one's just going to come from me because I've asked everybody else, and I would like to ask one of my own. 5 years from now, if we all got back into this situation, what would we like to be saying has happened? Where would we like to be? If we're looking 5 years from now, looking back, what would you consider successful to have achieved in this space?
Well, it would be the implementation of the National Retrofit Strategy, that we've got government commitment, leadership, that we're starting to roll out our retrofit work, but we're looking at fabric first as well as the heating systems. So that would be great. Bearing in mind, our strategy is 20 years plus. We need to get going.
Yeah, what Brian said.
Well, what I'll add is, look at it from the consumer, the practical side, the environment side, is that what we would start to see is our excess winter deaths starting to fall, rates of asthma, pneumonia among old people, all those diseases that are linked to cold homes starting to fall. We see the emissions from our homes starting to fall. And we would just see people starting to really be able to see, perhaps they visit a friend's home and find, oh, this is, you must have huge heating bills. This house is so warm. No, I've insulated, I've got this, that, and something else. And so you really start to see a real pushing desire from people seeing what good looks like, because one of the problems we have at the moment is people don't know what good looks like. They don't know what's possible, and so we then have eventually, in 30 years' time, the Scandinavian ambassador going, gosh, things have changed in Britain and it's great.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. So thank you so much, all of you, for your time. I know how busy you all are, and it's been a really insightful chat. I want to apologise to all our audience question askers who I didn't quite get to cover off. There were still plenty more questions and still more coming in right now. A few of these, I think, have been answered in the presentation, so it's worth noting that this session is available on demand via the same link you just signed up now. So please feel free to share with anybody else. Go back and watch bits if you want them again, and it will be online free on demand via the same link. So it's not catch it now or never see it again. And I'd just like to say a huge thank you to our panelists, because it's been a really great chat, and I'm really happy that we were able to host it today. So that's it from me. I'd just like to say thank you and goodbye.
Bye.